So today I am going to be speaking with an activist and an artist and a filmmaker named Eleanor Goldfield. I have not met her before. She is a friend of a friend. I actually was referred to her by Lee Camp. For people who are familiar with Lee Camp, Redacted Tonight, among many other things, he was a guest on this podcast. And this is someone who he wanted us to bring on. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Eleanor is a creative activist and a journalist, and her work has appeared on Free Speech TV, and where she has produced and hosted the weekly radical news show Act Out for 5 years. And her print work has appeared in Mint Press News, Roar, Popular Resistance, RT, and others. And she is the host of a podcast. She has her own podcast called Act Out, and she co-hosts the podcast called Common Censored with Lee Camp. So, I mean, this sort of, it's just really shows you all the connections in the activist community. And so this is definitely someone who is a change maker and is using her platform and her skills and everything to really put information out there. And what we're really going to be talking about today is her documentary. And the documentary is called Hard Road of Hope. And it has to do with the people in West Virginia and Appalachian, what they're dealing with as dying coal industry employees, as well as the major environmental impacts that are taking place as a result of the mountaintop removal from mining and other things like fracking. And so this is a very specific example of climate justice that's taking place right now as we're needing to transition from fossil fuels. There is this very strong pull to keep us where we are. And a big part of that has to do with the livelihood and the history of mining communities and people that work in the fossil fuel industry. And a lot of these people, and I watched the movie, and it's really great. It does a very good job of showing the generational connectedness that a lot of the people in Appalachia, in West Virginia, have to the land, have to the mountains. And so it isn't just a matter of, okay, well, we can retrain them to do something else. Well, that might be, but we need to also talk about, okay, but what about the destruction of where they live and their land due to all of the mining and other, types of extractions that are going on. So what we're going to talk about the movie. I definitely want to give her an opportunity to talk about what that was like and the experience in filming that. And especially when you're dealing with going into vulnerable communities and how you're received. And then we'll talk more about, like, what are the solutions? Where do we go from here? How do we reconcile these communities that are literally dying off in Appalachia with doing something like a Green New Deal, and how can we best serve vulnerable communities and especially communities whose livelihoods and histories are part of, our Americana is mining. I mean, there are generations of people that's all they know. Their great grandfather was a miner, their grandpa was a miner, and they grew up in this. And so you're not just changing an occupation. You're not just changing where they get their fuel. You're essentially completely rewriting a history for people in a sense. So it's difficult. It's difficult for people who to change over, and it's extremely difficult from a perspective in places like Appalachia, where you've got entire towns dedicated to one industry. So we're going to talk about that when she comes on here. So I'm going to read this quote. Off of the Heart of Hope webpage, Hard Road of Hope explanation from her movie. And it's very simple. And you buy it online you can make a contribution. I mean, it's not difficult. And I'm going to give everybody the information, but this is a really interesting quote. Known by many, even inside the state, as a throwaway resource colony filled with nothing but hillbillies and poison streams and coal ash, these hills and hollers have a lot to show us about people power, resilience, beauty, and indeed ourselves. More than a microcosm of corporate malfeasance, bad policies, and extremist propaganda, West Virginia is home to a radical working class history and the hard work of hoping for and building a better future. So I just like that quote. I mean, I had just briefly touched on a little bit what this is about, and I see Eleanor in our waiting room, so I'm gonna let her in. We're gonna see how this goes. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. It's nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
So I just did like a brief little intro about Hard Road of Hope, and I'm going to pull it up. Look, I'm very tech challenged. I'm slightly older than you and a lot of your contemporaries. So a lot of this is kind of new to me, but I just want to put this up here so that people can see what we're talking about. Okay, so people, this is the website for the documentary, and we're going to get into that, but it's really interesting. I watched it a few days ago, or maybe it was like a week ago. I don't know. Time is blending. And it's really good. So anyway, this is what we're talking about. It's hardroadofhope.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So everybody will check that out, and all the descriptions and stuff will be down below. So anyway, since we've never met, tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe something that's just, because all I have is whatever is written right here, like your little blurb about what you're about. But how did you come about this project? Like where do you come from in relation to where you came about doing this particular project?
So I've been doing journalism work for quite some time, and part of what I feel is important as a journalist is to actually go to where the story is, if possible. And if not possible, then to connect directly with people who are there and living the story, because corporate media does a really good job of ruining stories and grassroots realities on purpose, of course. But I felt that it's important whenever possible to go to these places, and so I've done a lot of frontline work, predominantly on the environmental front, whether that be pipelines or logging projects and the like. And so the plan to go down to West Virginia kind of came from a joint effort between myself and one of the other people that's in the film, JENerational, whose ancestral homelands are part of southern West Virginia, what is now southern West Virginia. And so we wanted to both for environmental reasons and also for her specific indigenous work. And I soon realized that when I was there that this was a little bit too much to put into an article, or at the time I had a TV show, and I realized that this was not something that I could cram into a half hour segment. So I decided that I would dive into the medium known as filmmaking, and that happened.
That's, you know what, that is, to me, that's how I ended up sitting exactly where I am. When you allow the sort of organic nature of things in what you're doing to lead you to the next thing, and you're sort of open and receptive to it, you end up exactly where you're supposed to be. It's really fascinating. You said something in the very beginning of the movie about it reminds you of what's happened to your people. So I wasn't sure if you had some sort of indigenous background and what that was, or where your roots are.
That's actually Jen speaking. That's not me.
Oh, okay. So there you go. That explains it. It wasn't you. So you're from where? Where are you based?
I'm based in Washington, D.C.
Oh, well, I'll be there next week.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Business. So this is one of the major issues that we talk about a lot, having to do with climate crisis and is climate justice. And this, to me, is one of the premier examples of what happens with vulnerable communities and our transition away from fossil fuels. But it's so much more than that. So talk a little bit about what it's like where you went in terms of the history of the mining community and how it's more than just, oh, this is what they do for a living.
So I mean, the history of these communities is very much steeped in coal, particularly in the southern part of the state. But it's really more than that. It's steeped in a deep radicalism and an understanding of the difference between king coal and coal miners. And so, for instance, when the teachers' strike popped off and started in West Virginia, a lot of people were surprised by that because it seems like West Virginia would not be where you'd start a strike. But indeed, if you look at the history of West Virginia, it makes perfect sense. Like that's the trajectory of their radical past. And if folks might be familiar with the movie Matewan or might have heard about the Battle of Blair Mountain or things like that, that all happened in West Virginia. These mine wars that happened at the turn of the 20th century, where mine workers, black and white, not only marched together, but actually took up arms and fired on coal barons in order to demand basic workers' rights. This is a part of their history, and that is very much intertwined with coal and what's happened over the course of just a few generations, which is really impressive when you think of the machinery of propaganda that has just in a couple of generations turned people who were very, very proud of their unions, were very, very proud of workers' rights and regulation, has turned that into people who are very, very proud of their oppression and are very proud of the destruction that is created at the hands of the corporations of big coal and now, of course, big oil and gas. And it's really going down there. It's really fascinating to see how people are telling their history as a way of grassroots organizing, because it connects people to the part of their past that is the more important part that's been lost in the course of this deep propagandization, which is the part that demands basic workers' rights and demands better from both the politicians, but perhaps more importantly, the corporate state that controls the politicians.
So let's talk a little bit about what the varying issues are. I mean, obviously, mountaintop removal is a huge issue, but there's also fracking going on. I mean, so there's a variety of different environmental problems that are going on specifically. And as we know, and everyone knows, that these things that absolutely impact our most vulnerable communities the hardest, like anything else. And so, talk about like environmentally, what exactly is going on that's affecting them from a land standpoint?
Yeah, so one of the things that one of the folks in the film says, Paul Corbett Brown, who's the president of Keeper of the Mountains, says is that if you were to line up all of the destruction from mountaintop removal, it would start at the White House here in DC, and it would stretch all the way to San Francisco, and it would be 0.8 of a mile wide. And that's what the highway of mountaintop devastation would look like. And that's, of course, just what's been removed, decapitated, basically, from the tops of these mountains. That does not include the coal slurry, which is what is like the toxic runoff that happens once they wash coal, with a tremendous cocktail of toxins that are, proprietary blends that we're not allowed to know what's in them. We just know that they poison us. And so this is the amount of devastation that's done in the matter of weeks or even less, because of the extreme the extreme way that mountaintop removal mines, as opposed, it's a bit like fracking, really. So fracking is what we do when we can't get to the oil that we've already gotten to in an easier fashion, and mountaintop removal is the same way. You've already dug back into the mountain and gotten the stuff that's just sitting there waiting for you. And now you have to blow the top of the mountain to get to the seams in the middle of the mountain, and that's basically what mountaintop removal is.
And the amount of devastation. Is there any coming back? Like, once you take off the top of a mountain in the way that they do it, it's not like that ecosystem can grow back.
No, I mean, once it's done, it's done. You can talk about reclamation to a certain point. Like, yes, we don't have to have these giant impoundments of coal slurry, but you can't put those ecosystems back together. And this is particularly important because Appalachia is the second most biodiverse region in the world.
See, nobody knows that. I didn't know that. And I go to Appalachia. I go to North Carolina, the mountains, every summer. So I did not know that. That's really, and it doesn't surprise me. It's extremely green. I highly recommend people go there. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, when you watch this movie, you get the overhead visual of what we're talking about. If I were more tech savvy, I could put up a picture, but basically they decapitate the tops of the mountains. So instead of looking at this lush green mountaintop, you're looking at like a flat top of sand, and it looks like a mining quarry, and it's just devastating. And then in addition, they are having fracking there as well. Is that true?
Yeah. So basically, coal is dying. There's nothing that all the subsidies in the world can't change the fact that it's a finite resource, and it took millions of years to create, and we haven't created anything new. So not even, King Coal, the friends of King Coal can save coal from dying. And so basically what's happening is, as one of the coal miners told me, he's like, what we're trying to do desperately is to just dig the last of the peanut butter out of the peanut jar when you're just like scraping the hell out of it.
Yeah.
But there's not much left. And so instead of shifting, to like renewables or something, the fracking industry found that this would be a great way to create that shift. So the fracking is predominantly happening in the center of the state, center and north part of the state, whereas the mining was predominantly in the south. So in the South, you see much more economic devastation, although, I mean, it's the third poorest state in the nation, so it's not like anybody's really doing that well, particularly now. But the fracking is happening towards the center part of the state, and basically it's the same playbook that coal used. It's just that now it's shifted industries. It's the same kind of devastation. People are still getting sick. Water is still being poisoned. Ecosystems are still being destroyed. It's just that it looks different. And the problem that a lot of folks are dealing with in terms of organizing is that it's not like blowing the top off a mountain. People come in and they're like, oh, we're just going to dig a little well. No big deal. It's a small footprint, doesn't look that bad. And then all of a sudden your animals start dying and you're not really sure why. So fracking is far more insidious in that sense that you're not exploding an entire mountain. It starts off a little bit less evil looking and feeling, but the end result is, of course, the same.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at, just the looks of these communities and they're decimated. I mean, these look like little shanty ghost towns and it's devastating. And yet these people seem fundamentally stuck there. Like that's when I see places like not just Appalachia, but that's definitely one of those places. There's people are literally stuck there. There's nowhere else to go. They don't know anything else. This is all they know. And so how are they in terms of when we talk about things like transitioning from fossil fuels and transitioning to green energy? How is that received in these communities? Like, where are they at in terms of like any sort of Green New Deal,
Well, this is kind of something I spoke with a few miners about, former miners, and it's also a pet peeve of mine because I grew up in the South as well. And it was really irritating because what he said is that, environmentalists think that we don't talk about the environment because we don't know anything about it, right? We're just some dumb hillbillies who don't know any better. But that's not true. And the fact of the matter is that you can't tell somebody that they're evil for being a coal miner and not offer them another option and then just leave. And then basically one of the things that Terry, who's in the film, told me, who's a former miner, he's like, do you want to make an environmentalist? I'll tell you how to make an environmentalist. You put 500 coal miners to work in a renewable plant. That's how you make an environment. And then he said, in 5 years, they'd kick I don't know if I can curse, but
you can curse. I'm not monetized.
They kick the shit out of a coal miner if you even mention coal.
Right.
But you can't just tell somebody this is wrong. You should rather starve to death and watch your family become homeless than work at a coal mine, because the options for these folks are work in coal or work at Walmart, and that's not really much of a choice when you look at the economics of those situations. And the same thing with fracking, work in fracking or work at Walmart, or, become addicted to opioids. Like, what are the choices for these people here? The economic decisions are being made for them. And
it seems like we need to be focusing our strategies, our Green New Deal strategies, specifically in these communities. Like these communities should be the ground zero for employing people in these new types of jobs that are cleaner energy jobs. I mean, this is where we need to start for people. But you're saying that you believe they would welcome those opportunities.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to speak for them, but the folks that I spoke to would be glad to see that transition. And of course, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, there is a deep cultural connection to coal, but that is something that wasn't always the case. It's like the Ursula K. Le Guin quote, like, capitalism seems insurmountable, but so did the divine right of kings. Like, we think of these things as if they are always going to be there, but of course they're not. And so the idea that someone is very tied to the coal industry because it feels like part of their culture, well, that can change in a generation, and you just have to give them those options. If you then say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any more coal jobs, but we've got jobs planting trees. Okay, Like
Yeah.
if those are the choices that you hand to people, then that's and if you engage them in these decision making schemes and make it clear that this is about the health of their community and the health of their family, and I think this is the bigger issue as well, is that it shouldn't just be this top down issue like, here, have a job. It should be, what do you want for your community? What is it that you need? And this is why we've seen so many people, for instance, in West Virginia that really liked Bernie but then voted for Trump, because Bernie was speaking their language. He was like, oh, you want healthcare. Oh, you want a livable wage. Like, listen, when you listen to people, really what they're asking for is the same stuff for the most part across the board. Sure, you have some people on the fringes that are like, no, I'd love to get black lung and diet 40, but that's not the majority, right? So
Yeah,
I
right.
think, actually organizing with folks, which is, what folks in West Virginia are doing, and saying like, hey, this is what we need, this is what we demand, and this is what we're going to try to build.
I've always thought of that region as someplace, and someone who has been there, and I haven't been to West Virginia, but I've been through the Appalachian Mountains, and people don't understand, it is an extremely isolated life. It's not like you think like, oh, you just go somewhere else. It's extremely remote in a lot of these places, and it's very isolated. And there's people that, even in your movie, that probably never really left the state of West Virginia in their lives. Like, this is what they know. And I think that it's very easy for corporations to take advantage, very specifically, of communities like that. And I, it's just devastating. And I've seen this for years, and it's always been very upsetting to me. And, I just feel like there's got to be a better way. And these people, in many cases, and I've read other things based in there, they just feel forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's something you encountered when you were there.
Well, I think this ties into the conversation about the opioid epidemic. West Virginia ranks first in the entire country when it comes to the opioid epidemic. And if you look at the main causes of addiction, they are isolation, not just physical, but mental and emotional, and trauma, whether that be physical or emotional, which, when you have a place like West Virginia that's incredibly isolated, but also the jobs that are available are physically taxing, are physically demanding. You have a perfect intersection for, between capitalism and kind of like a built-in destruction thanks to the industries that are there. You have a perfect intersection for something like opioids to take hold. And I think that, people feel very forgotten, and they feel, as Paul pointed out, they feel hungry for more than just change. For more than just food. And I think that this is something that is absolutely kind of like another point that's in the film, is that, well, we talk about West Virginia like it's a throwaway, but if we're going to throw away every state that's been destroyed by corporate malfeasance, what state would you have left? Yeah. What people would you have left?
Yeah. And these are, it's like, these are the people that form our country. These families, especially people that go back generations there, this is really like the backbone of what formed our country. And I don't think that it gets anywhere near enough appreciation and respect. And it is pretty much a forgotten about place. And it's just devastating. And so what is the best solution at this point? Like, what would be the next best step going forward to sort of help get them out of where they are? I'm talking about specifically from a policy perspective.
Well, in terms of policy, that's kind of not my sphere. I'm much more of a grassroots, damn the politician type of person.
I was just looking for you to give me an easy answer as to what I should be promoting. That's all. I was just looking for you to give me the easy answer, and then I would just put it in a box and promote that. Say, we need to do this.
I would say promote the grassroots organizations, because unfortunately, politicians and the structure of the system that we have in this nation are always going to be out of touch. And they by default can't listen to the people, because 75% of a politician's time, and I know this from working in DC, 75% of their time is spent on fundraising. You can't possibly expect to understand what people need when 25% of your time is actually saved for that, when in reality that 25% is spent in talking to Wall Street anyway. So I think that where people should be looking is grassroots organizations. This is the only way that we've ever gained anything in this country, is because people are organizing on the ground. The only reasons politicians have ever made decisions that we agree with is because they've been pushed to do so by the people. So I'd say the answer lies in the people themselves. And so,
Yeah.
you know, the folks that are in the film that are organizing around these issues, that are fighting to build something better, that's where we should focus our attention.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, we're very big here. Generational change, one of the things we talk about a lot is we're very active locally. We have a group of our volunteers. Today I was out working community gardens. So we're very local based. I think that's where we have the most impact. That's where we have the most power with our local people. And that's where you see the most instant rewards for whatever it is you're doing. It doesn't take as long to get things done at a local level. And so I think that's important. So I would like to put this out there to anybody listening that, let's say you're someone like me and my community is great, right? My community is great. I live in a very nice little polished, gated suburban little place. It's all lovely. And so I dedicate my time towards the communities near me that are vulnerable communities. And so I would urge people to look at people in West Virginia and sort of adopt them as part of all of our community, because I think there are a lot of us that can speak up for them and need to make a ruckus about this. Sometimes you need people on the outside to make a big stink about things. So I think this is an important issue. So what was really your sort of like, you were intended, who were you really wanting to speak to with this film? Like, what was really what's your ask? You know, like, what's the ask?
Well, basically, I wanted to share these stories, and I think that it's an important point. And as a word nerd, I kind of get into these things. Like, I'm not telling these stories; I'm sharing them because they're not my stories to tell. I can't, and I wouldn't speak for these people because they can speak for themselves. You know, they're the idea that there's no such thing as a voiceless person, just someone who's been silenced. And I think that that's really important. And so, like, my goal was to share these stories, not tell them. And to have folks be able to use this both as an organizing tool, as and as an educational tool, and to see like how powerful it can be to teach history. Like, I think we think about, because the way that we learn history in this country is not only boring, it's wrong.
I could. Yeah, don't get me started on. I have a lot of grievances about the misinformation that I accumulated, and I'm a good generation, probably older than you. But yeah, we were told all sorts of wrong things. Well, history is told by the point of view of the victor. So,
well, right, and I think that you know, what's so important, and this is something that we also use in the mutual aid networks that I'm a part of, is the power of storytelling. We're telling the stories that have been purposely buried and silenced by the state because they're dangerous. It's dangerous to learn that Black and white mine workers at the turn of the 20th century of all times marched together and shot at coal barons. That is dangerous history to teach people, because it teaches people what their actual power is. And that we are basically, like, it is our complicity that allows the oppression and the destruction to continue. So these stories are super important in grassroots organizing efforts. So that's what I wanted to share with this film, and also to share that while West Virginia is absolutely a microcosm of pain and suffering, it is also a microcosm of radicalism and beauty and joy, and there's so much that can be extrapolated from that. And there, we can look in that mirror and see ourselves in so many different ways. And I feel that that's an important lesson to learn, particularly as somebody who grew up amongst, you know, like the poor, the typical like poor white communities in the South. They're not to be thrown away. And it's important, particularly for environmental organizers, to not walk into these spaces and talk down to folks. Don't talk for them. Don't talk at them. Talk
you mean
with
people
them.
don't like to be called deplorables? That's so shocking. I thought people like to be completely minimized by elitists. Yeah, that's definitely a common thread. Is that, and the thing is, this concept that people who aren't academically educated are not as valuable, and how and what we value, and it's all kinds of messed up. And it does go back to how we teach history. What is it like there now in terms of race relations? Because one of the biggest things that we see, obviously, like what you were just saying, and how we keep that part of history quiet, is we need to keep the races fighting. We need to be fighting against each other. If all the races unified as workers or miners or whatever the labor is, we don't have a labor party in this country, but let's say we did have a labor party, and everybody really got together, well, that wouldn't really work well for the big money makers. And so, you know, a lot of and I'm not saying we don't have race issues, we have race issues, but like you're saying, it's very purposefully kept that way and manipulated to keep that kind of vision. So what is the racial demographic in these towns, in these mining places?
Well, West Virginia is predominantly white. But that, of course, doesn't mean that there aren't, there are indigenous people that live there. There are Latinx folks, there are Black folks, and other people of color. And while this is not something that my film focuses on specifically, while I mean I do cover indigenous issues towards the end, but I think that it's kind of a twofold issue. One is that white people need to educate other white people about systemic racism. We cannot lean on people of color to do that.
It's not their job, people. Right. It's just not their job.
Oh my God. And for those of us who have been privileged enough to not only learn things properly, but to have other folks hold our hands, it's our job to pay that forward. So that's the first part. The other part is to, as organizers, as white organizers, our job is to go into these communities and have a beer with these folks on their porch and say, hey, you don't trust the government? I don't either. Let's talk about it. And talk about why they, and analyze, like kind of co-analyze with them why they're punching down as opposed to punching up, because punching up is where it's at and punching down is not going to get you anywhere. And so having these, and I've had these conversations on porches and patios and kitchens and whatever. And yeah, they can get kind of awkward, but they're important conversations, and they plant seeds, not just for them, but for me too. I mean, this is that mutualism that is so important. I'm learning something too. It's not this, hey, let me sit down and tell you what you need to know. That's this sort of derogatory perspective to have. So I think it's important to have that understanding that, like, I want to go into these communities and talk with people, not at them. And I don't want to give them some PowerPoint about what racism means. Like, that's not how you win people, because you have to understand the way that the KKK is walking into these communities is saying, you're oppressed. We feel bad for you. You are powerful because you are white. And we have to come with something that makes people feel heard, that makes people feel seen, and that makes people feel that there is a potential for solidarity with people that live beyond their street, that live beyond their community, that live beyond their state's borders.
Yeah, I mean, look, organizations like the Klan work in the same way that our government works. And they're going to capitalize on everybody's little misfortune and where everybody's wrong. And they're going to try to create a situation where you're always kicking down. And I talk about that a lot too, about that no matter what your lot is in life, and I say this all the time to people, I can assure you with every fiber of my being that the root cause of your issues is not the person that's below you on the socioeconomic ladder, okay? Like, not the immigrant, not the Muslim. Like, I don't know what your issue is, but I know for sure it's not that. So your issue lies above you. It's always above you. And I think that that's really important. And I think that this movie was great. I was really glad to see that you did that. And I'm glad that Lee had told me about you. So talk a little bit about what you do over there, because I know that you have your own podcast, but I know you also do one with him.
So I actually have 3 podcasts.
Oh my God.
I get bored easily. So there's the podcast that I have with Lee, which is Common Censored, which was it's kind of like basically a radical take on the news. And then we have, and some philosophizing. And then there's Act Out, which is my own podcast, which is my kind of time in the nerdery, which I spend talking about everything from, philosophical musings to mutual aid to galaxies.
So it's you talk, like, but it's you. It's not like you're not having people to come on. It's just you. Okay.
Yeah, it's my basically I take ideas from people ahead of time, and then I dissect them, and yeah. And then there's a third one, which is called Silver Threads, which is with Carla Bergman. She's the co-author of the book Joyful Militancy, which is rad. I definitely recommend that folks read it. It's like a self-help book for organizers. And that's a podcast where we talk to seasoned organizers and radicals and talk to them about their journey and face palm moments and what's going on with their current fight and build efforts. So.
Yeah, I mean, you were definitely we do this thing every week on our live stream where we do a bootlicker of the week, and then we do our Changemaker of the week. And so since you're not on our live, I'm just going to say, so Eleanor is one a Changemaker. And a lot of people that I've noticed this for the past 2 years that I've been working in the political circles, that certain people everybody is a bridge in and of themselves between 2 different factions of people, but some people are just really good at doing that. And those are the people that are building this big coalition. And I'm very grateful that I now have some small part in it. And it allows me to meet people like you and really, I say it all, this is the revolution. It's, 2 years ago, I wasn't sitting here, I wasn't talking to you, you didn't have this film. And so all of it's really, I think we're making more progress than people often realize when we talk about activism and things that are actually happening, because you can very easily get defeatist when you look at things on a national and a global level. When you look at the people that are supposedly in charge, it's like, I mean, how do you wrap your head around that? But I do think we're making some significant progress in changing minds. And that is what we need to be doing, because, you can't legislate a lot of this stuff until everybody's on board with it and it becomes sort of like this normal discourse. And once you do that, the policies will follow. When everybody believes things like healthcare is a human right, the policy will follow. When everybody understands fracking, no good, the policy will follow. So these types of things in education, you are definitely someone that is putting a lot of important information out there. And we definitely need that. So let me ask you this. If I were to say to you, generational change, what do you think of? Like, what would that mean to you? If I say something like, what could that mean?
I can't remember who said this. It's a quote, but there's no such thing as new ideas, just new ways to feel them. And I love that. And I was recently on one of the podcasts that I have, Silver Threads. We were recently talking to Clee Benally, who's an awesome Indigenous organizer and anarchist. And he said that one of the things that he learned, he was taught very early, he's Diné, is that time is cyclical. And so you always come around to things again, whether that be seasons or problems or solutions. And so I think of it that way, that like generational change is cyclical, and progress only goes at the speed and in the direction that we push it. And this is kind of also the point of the film. Like, it's a hard road. Like there's a lot of holes, and there's shit in the way, and but it is a beautiful road at the same time. And it is where like the most incredible parts of humanity is on that road. And I think that in terms of generational change, what that means to me is that like you will try to I think it was Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panthers, who said that in order to live with hope and dignity, I have to fight. And that's what that means, is that like in terms of generational change, it just means that I am going to fight, not because I necessarily think we'll win, because there is no winning. There's no like, I got this.
Right. There's no
done.
end line. Right. There's no end. Right.
Yeah, it will continue. Like there is no winning against the forces of greed and the forces of sociopathy. But it just means that we will continue to fight, and we will build alternatives, and we will build worlds, like the Zapatistas said, like a world where many worlds are possible. And that is to me something that I can like look ahead and think like, oh, that's what I would want to share with my kids and other people's kids. And yeah.
So what's next? You did Appalachia, and first of all, I'm going to tell you this, that now I'm going to use the phrase word nerd. I think that's awesome, because I too can really go down that rabbit hole. I always say, like, I'm the person who got the 700 on the verbal SAT, but the 400 on math, where they thought that I was special. And I mean, not special. So like, what's your next project? I mean, obviously you have a lot of environmental, concerns. That's something that's matters. So what are you working on right now? What's your next project?
Right now I'm doing a lot of mutual aid. There were some projects that I had planned, but of course those have been put on hold because I can't really travel places. So right now I'm really just focusing on the mutual aid and trying to continue to put the film out there and make sure that folks can access it for both educational and organizational means.
Yeah, no, these are the kinds of things that should be being shown in schools. But then again, I also think that Howard Zinn should be required reading for high school students. So, and it's so important. And people understand when we're talking about climate crisis and climate justice, there are so many parts of it. It's like for us in Florida, obviously, it's much more sea level rise and saltwater encroachment into our freshwater aquifer. And I mean, we have different system problems. But it's all the same. It's greed coming in and taking things that really don't belong to them and leaving the people on the ground to sort of just deal with their rubble. Yep. And that's what we're fighting against. And so, these are stories that everybody needs to hear. I mean, I could almost see a documentary like this about, you could almost do one for every ecosystem in this country. Like you could go around to let me tell you about the natives like that live down here and what they've had to deal with too. It's like, there's no end to the greed. And that's what it is. But I do like that you made it hopeful. And the truth is, when you're there and you're in those mountains, it's hard to not feel good. Like, even though there might be some really sad things happening, it's so beautiful there. Like, it's hard to not feel that.
It is. It's absolutely gorgeous there. I fell in love with it for sure.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to promote? Any websites you want us to put up? Because again, tech challenge, but if you say it, then my producers will nicely hear it and put it in.
Just like magic.
Look, old people need young people. If I didn't have young people, like my whole campaign, I was the oldest person. I was the oldest person, but I don't know. Like, I still call it the Twitter. I don't know. Like, there's so many things. Like, I'm just so out of it, And so I need the young people. The young people are everything. Or I would.
We all do.
Yeah,
we definitely need.
Well, you are the young people.
Well, I mean, I hang out with like 16 and 17-year-olds that always teach me new things. So I think I'm in the middle.
Those are definitely the younger people. Thank you so much for doing this. Give me your tags or whatever you want. Let me know. What do you have?
Yeah, it's just the film is up at hardroadofhope.com, and you can find out more about my work over at artkillingapathy.com.
Art Killing Apathy. That's a cool name.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for coming on and talking about our film. And everybody is going to watch that film, and they're going to make a nice little donation. And yeah, I saw that. I did it, but now I'm trying to find a way. But now it wants me to do it again to pull it up again. So now I'm not sure. Now I'm kind of like trying to figure out what to do, because I wanted to pull it up again, but then I'm like, okay, but I don't know what I want to rebuy it. I mean, I already bought it. So anyway, that's it. Everybody should buy it. It's a really good film. And you guys know I'm really nerdy about documentaries. I watch like a documentary every day. Yeah, no, I'm like, talk about a nerd. I watch like daily. I'm watching, like, it's my thing. And I'd much rather do that than watch the political circus. And yeah, and the political circus is something that I'm forced in from time to time. Like, I'm forced to deal with that. And I would infinitely much rather do like what you're doing, or at least give a platform to what you're doing. So I appreciate it so much. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Everyone, check out the movie Hard Road of Hope. And Eleanor Goldfield, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye. That was cool. First of all, let me just say, how cute is she? I mean, look, I know I'm not supposed to say stuff like that anymore. It's like, I don't even know what it is. It's somehow offensive, but she really is. She's got like this, for the people that are only listening, she's kind of got like this Joss Stone, really cool vibe going on, and great hair. So, and anybody who knows me knows I always love the hair. So anyway, that was Eleanor Goldfield. Everybody check out Hard Road of Hope. And I think that yes, it's sad, but it's also inspiring. And we do need to create ground swellings of resistance. We need to be, and not only creating them, but supporting them in other places. So like what Eleanor was saying about, like, you wouldn't necessarily expect West Virginia to be a hot seat of a teacher strike. And yet there it is, because people all over are getting more and more radicalized by the declining conditions. And when you look at people in vulnerable communities, they are facing it even worse. And so the people in Appalachia, let's be clear, it's never been easy life there. It's a hard life. And a lot of people there know that, understand that, they respect it. That's just the nature of how they live. But when you're talking about the climate crisis issues, that is on us. Okay. This is on us to deal with. This is on us to come up with solutions so that we can have a functioning world without punishing our vulnerable people. And that's what this is. These are people that are basically forced into a situation wherein there are no options. And that is a result of greed. It's absolutely a result of greed. And I think that we all need to be very cognizant that while people might be different from us and might be less educated academically than us, and this is something that really has to be thought through much more, I think, on the Democrat side of the aisle. The whole concept of when Hillary said deplorables, it's bigger than people realize. And that really hits me hard. And the reason it hits me hard is not only that it is creating a monolith of an entire group of people that you see as lesser than, okay, because that's really what it is. But it's doing so based on like this idea that somehow we are better than those people, and we don't even really know those people. And so I would really suggest that people watch this movie, other documentaries that really highlight communities, and especially vulnerable communities. Because for most of us, we're not going to West Virginia. We're not going to be able to go and meet the coal miners and know what their struggle is and try to understand what that's like to try to make a living and know that you're also trying to help the environment, but you can't because you're stuck in this thing. We can't understand that life. And so we rely on, she's not a storyteller, as Eleanor said, she's a story sharer, but we rely on these so that we can learn about other people in our world, and we can have a better understanding of these people that are not the same in our community. We have different issues all over places, whether it's socioeconomic, racial, religion, there's a lot of things that divide us. But when we learn about the differences and we learn about other communities and other people, we have an opportunity not just to, learn about it, but to actually reach out, form a coalition, form a connection. Because you know what? I would bet you anything that the poor coal miners in West Virginia have a lot more in common with the poor laborers down here than they don't. So, people who are being used by the system are people who are being used by the system. So we are about building that up. I love the way that Eleanor spoke about generational change as being an ongoing process, because it is. There is no end. This never ends. We are going to be continually fighting a battle of progress. And it's for the most part against moneyed interests and greed. And then along the way, those interests use things like politics, religion, and all that to kind of create the dividing lines and create the color war. So we have to overcome that. But ultimately, we're going to constantly be fighting against greed. And so check out Hard Road of Hope. And I'll see you guys next podcast. Peace out.